This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, welcome to our hangout with Emily and myself. We're going to be talking about cabs. I want to get started so we have time. I know Emily and I have a lot that we want to talk about and cover, so hopefully we have the opportunity to get through all of our slides. Feel free to leave if you need, or if you have questions. We'd like to take them as we go, so please pop in on the chat, or raise your hand or get our attention and let us know that you have questions. We want to answer those as we go. I just want to make sure that everyone's aware that our goal with these hangouts is to make sure they're collaborative and people are taking away from them things that they need. So please, participate as you can and as you feel comfortable doing. And we're really happy to have you here and be learning together. And yes, we'll share the slides. I'm sure Emily will put them up in either today or tomorrow. In the next couple days, we'll get to it. So yeah, I'm gonna let Emily. I think you should be able to share your screen now, Emily, so I'm going to let you start.
Yeah, I can do that. So hang on a second, I'll get that going. Sorry.
You're good. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Also, I'm going to take this opportunity. Our networking survey ends tomorrow. So please go into the group and fill out that networking survey. We are not going to open up again for 3 to 4 months. So if you want to be able to have someone look you up on the networking survey that we're making, please go fill it out. Even if you are just brand new to this, we still want to know where you are, who you are, and what you're doing so that we can connect at some point in the future.
I apologize, Megan. Now I feel like someone who's not tech savvy, even though I usually pride myself on being so, but my share screen button is grayed out and nothing happens when I click on it. And I did go and update for sharing with GoToMeeting.
I just made you an organizer. See if that works.
Okay. Let's see. Yeah, I think I have to click on one other thing and then I think it'll work.
Hey, Hillary.
Yes.
Do you have an idea of when the directory is going to be available?
I can't see you, but I know that's Felice. Hi.
Hi.
As soon as we close it, we're gonna sift through the data and figure out the best way to present it, and then we'll be making it available after that. So since it's our first round, I don't have an exact amount of time that's gonna take, but I'm hoping pretty quickly.
Okay, thanks.
We also have a name contest running, so if you want to help us name our group, that would be awesome. Go either add something in there or like a name that you see that you want to put in the final round. Just go give it a like or a react so we know that you like it. Yay, Emily.
All right, I think it's working. Just give it a second. All right, does that look great? Yes.
Looks great.
As we begin to talk about the different types of specific branches that you might have, one thing I'd love to see in the chat is people sharing examples of ways that they have dealt with that particular type of branch, or specific questions they have about it. And if we don't have time to answer all of the questions during the presentation today, we can look back over the chat afterwards. The other thing is occasionally sometimes people will ask questions that I think are really good to talk about, but might be a little bit beyond, either beyond the scope of the current presentation or might be something that's more related to the SBT process in general rather than this particular application. And if that's the case, then we might just address it in the group. So, okay. All right, so first we're just gonna introduce ourselves. Hillary, do you wanna go first?
Sure. Hi, Hillary. You're here because you are in a group with me, and so you probably see my name a lot. I live in northern Washington State on the West Coast, and I I'm here because I love skill-based treatment. I'm extremely passionate about it, as I'm sure you've seen through my various activities and posts on the internet. That doesn't stop in person either. So I love these hangouts. I love sharing information. And I tell people frequently, the only reason I feel that I know how to do SBT well is because of this Facebook group, which is why I'm very passionate about it. I find it's just such a wonderful community to learn from one another. So these hangouts are my way of trying to give that back and make sure other people are getting those opportunities to learn and grow from one another and teach me too at the same time. So I'm really happy that you're here, and I'm so grateful for this community and where it's at right now. And I'm so thankful all of you guys are here with us tonight.
Yeah, so same thing. My name is Emily Kearney, and I live in Portland, Oregon, so Pacific Northwest too, although I'm originally from New York City. So I also am a member of the group, and am just really excited about the whole concept of the SBT process. And this particular topic that we're talking about today is one I just feel really passionate about, and a particular one where when I first began to learn about the SBT process, which was called denial and delay tolerance training at that point, a lot of the branches we're going to talk about today are areas where before I was a BCBA and in my first year or so of being a BCBA, I really struggled with learners that had this type of functional relationship with their behavior in the environment and specific types of reinforcement. And as soon as I began to do the training for this, I just sort of breathed a sigh of relief, like, now I know what to do in all these types of unique situations where none of the traditional interventions that we might normally use were successful. And it just felt, I just felt it like I was searching for something that was going to work and wasn't finding it. And this really is. So, so I'm excited to talk about these. And I'm not sure why Hillary picked the picture of her kids, aside from how cute it is. But this is my daughter, and this is one of her current HRE states, which is what she calls cozy, where she has to be on the couch with a pillow behind her, a blanket tucked in, her favorite friends, a snack, and then usually either a book or some music playing. So.
I picked it because it's clearly HRE for my kids. They're both active participants in this engaged activity.
Yeah.
And it was contextually appropriate at the moment because we were actually blowing out the backyard, and this was just like sitting there, and they picked it up and started playing with it, and this is the end result of that. So novel play stimuli.
Yeah. Okay, so here's just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm not going to read it because it's really for people who maybe can't attend live and are looking at the slides later on. We're going to try to break up into two halves. So for the first half, we'll be talking about kind of an overview of this particular type of programming, some things you want to think about, and then we're going to take a little break, which I forgot to put in the outline. We'll take a 4 or 5 minute break so everybody can use the bathroom, get up and stretch your legs, move around so you're not sitting in front of the computer all day, and then we'll come back and really dive into quite a few examples of specific types of CABs, and then some workbook examples of how you would start to program for those. Okay, so in the traditional PFA setting, and with a lot of the examples that are included in the training and in whether you've done the 10-hour training or not, just in Hanley's presentations, workshops and so forth, a lot of the examples are fairly common issues that you would see in terms of the learners hanging out with their favorite toys and a video playing, and then someone says, hey, it's time to come clean up. We're going to go over here to this table and work on a skill acquisition program that is really new to you. And so when we're doing the initial PFA and looking at how to program for that, one reason I was interested in talking about this was when I talked to some of my colleagues who had gone to some of the trainings, as well as other people who are newer to the process, it made sense how you would run the PFA for that type of situation, and it made sense how you would program for it. But when you have learners who have no problem giving up their toys and coming and sitting down at the table and working on 45 minutes of really challenging academic work without a break, but might run out of the building screaming because you moved one of the chairs in the room half an inch to the left. That's a little harder to figure out kind of how you apply this to that. One of the things that we want to talk a little bit about is how you might run the PFA in a fairly traditional way, but then when you go to do the programming for these specific types of branches, what your SR and EO conditions may look like may be very different from the initial assessment. Some challenges.
I'm going to jump in really quick. Really quickly. I'm just going to jump in and ask that everyone mute their microphones if they're not already muted, because they're getting some feedback.
It can be challenging to program this way because it really takes a fair amount of analysis to figure out exactly what the conditions are that really are the EO for your learner. And sometimes it's easy to inadvertently have more synthesized items in either the EO or the SR condition than are really relevant to the challenging behavior that's happening. And one of the criticisms of the PFA process is its potential for adding in extra elements that might strengthen challenging behavior when they didn't before, and that might not be relevant. And I know while we're not that worried about them here because we have this ultimate goal in mind, it can make programming not as quick and not as relevant to the actual issues for the learner, so that when they encounter those EOs in real life, they haven't had the practice of working through those as they would in the SBT process, because the SBT process didn't closely mimic enough what was happening naturally. That's the other thing then that I found talking to some people who did the training. And this, so I'm going to say I haven't done the traditional 10-hour training that's offered right now. I had kind of all of my training before that was an option, and I've caught up with lots of the other components of it. But talking to people recently, I got the feeling that people were throwing into the SR condition a lot of things that might not be at all relevant to the behavior at hand. So for example, if the learner is trying to avoid going in a particular room, we don't need to help them not go in that room and play their favorite song when we're reinforcing. We can just let them avoid going in that room. And so it seemed like sometimes people were taking away a much larger synthesized list for kind of every time you're running it, rather than if that's actually part of what's happening for the learner or not. And then the final thing is just, and I won't talk any more about it right now, but really starting to think about, for a lot of these specific types of CABs, you see them a lot with learners who have a fairly strong vocal-verbal repertoire or non-vocal verbal repertoire, where they may already be telling you exactly what it is that they want you to not do or do. And so it can be important to figure out whether an omnibus man is warranted, and if it is, how you add that in without losing that really integral piece of information, where if the learner is just giving an omnibus man and you don't know that what they actually want to do is have you help them move a chair over against the wall so that they can climb up and pull down a piece of tape that was left over from when there was a poster hanging. If you don't know that information, how are you going to reinforce the omnibus man? So just little something to think about as we move forward. All right, and I think Hillary, you were going to talk about this one a little bit.
Yeah, I love the points that you made. So when I like to think about maybe really intense SBT in a decontextualized environment versus kind of like light SBT in a more contextualized environment or natural context. So some of these might be like playing a game with mom, and an EO would be mom inadvertently knocking over your pond. And I think what Emily, what you were talking about is you wouldn't have to add anything necessarily to do that with some of the elements of SBT. You could just do it when playing the game. You don't have to add all the other stuff in if this is where the problem behavior lives, right? Maybe someone's engaged in self-care tasks and someone has replaced their purple toothpaste with a green one. So there's these really naturally, these things that EOs that rise in these very natural contexts that we want to treat that maybe don't arise in other contexts. And so some of what we're talking about, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but some of what we're talking about is thinking about, do you need to decontextualize to treat using the SBT methodologies, or can you treat in the natural situation that's at hand? And really quickly, one of my thoughts as you were talking, Emily, is this something that you want to wait to generalize to? So maybe you do have other things you can treat with a more decontextualized environment through SBT, and then this is one of your generalization probes, which I'll talk about at the next hangout for the magic of generalization. So if you're eating and then it's no more cheese and crackers, which is your favorite food, that's another big one. When you're walking somewhere and a fire engine drives by with a siren. I have a client where that would be an EO because they can't touch the fire truck. And I have another client where that would be an EO because of the sound. So there's all kinds of things contextually in that environment that are important to consider when we're thinking about treating. And we would lose that if we decontextualize, right? We would lose the ability to treat because we don't have the natural context in play. Getting ready to go on an outing, but when you just stepped outside the door, you have to go back in to grab something. Helping mom and dad make dinner, but this happened to me tonight. We planned to make spaghetti, but we're out of sauce, so there's no spaghetti tonight, which is everyone's favorite meal. Playing with toys, and the piece you need to make the diving board is missing, and drawing pictures. Teacher says no when you ask for a red marker, which is a perfectly reasonable request, but for some reason, adults can be jerks sometimes, and so they said no. We have to learn, not only do we need to learn to manage these things in a decontextualized environment, but I think really the goal of SBT is for these natural EOs to come up in a natural context and for our learners to be able to handle them then too.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add is that I've worked with quite a few learners where we're not completely decontextualizing the items, and this is something we'll talk about in another slide, but we're programming for these types of things to happen on a very regular and predictable rate so that when we run our SBT session, we're doing whatever this task is. We're playing a game, we're doing self-care, we're going for a walk somewhere, and then when we do that, if I'm running the session, I'm going to contrive the typical number of trials that I would do in that type of session with these types of things that would happen. So I am still in control of the situation as much as possible, but I'm purposefully evoking the types of things that would happen that would set off the learner in naturally with their parents, but because I did it on purpose, I can help and ensure that we can go through the chain correctly and then reinforce.
Yeah.
So I'll talk for a minute and then see what you'd like to add, Hillary. So usually when I'm looking at these type of things, I'm really wanting to look at stimulus classes of what the environment looks like and what types of triggers are going to happen in that environment. So when I am assessing, potentially even when I'm actually running the PFA or post PFA, when now I'm looking to program for these branches, I'm going to observe in the environment and look, okay, what's happening around me? If we're running maybe a second version of the PFA where we're trying to get more specific, I'm just looking, okay, if we're in the kitchen getting ready to make dinner, I'm going to look around for things that could be EOs relating to the meal. Not necessarily that are as triggering as the entire meal is off because we don't have red sauce, but maybe other things relating to not being able to find the spatula, or telling the learner that they can't help with a certain thing, like open the spaghetti box, or things that normally do. And then when I'm ready to do my programming, I've found it's really important that we have enough examples for staff of what those things look like, so that when they're contriving those in the SBT training time, when they're officially running it, that they're creating those opportunities that to anyone else observing, they have no idea what you are doing. It shouldn't look like you're running a session. It shouldn't look like you're specifically targeting something. It should just look like what would normally happen when you're doing that type of task, but you did it on purpose, knowing what will happen there. And when we're working on the programming, I really have a suggestion for the staff, and then when we generalize to parents, is just take a 3 or 4 foot area around you and look at what's in that area and use that as ideas of what you're going to do, rather than trying to sit and kind of come up with more complex things. Because that's what I do. I'm like, what's here? Okay, there's a lid. Is there a way to use this lid in this current activity, and could I come up with an EO relating to it? Like, it's just what's here. And then the last thing is thinking about what does the table of high expectations look like when you're running the kinds of branches that we're talking about, where there is no actual table. We're not leaving the situation and going somewhere else to do some other activity. The table is kind of sitting with that discomfort, thinking that your man has been denied when it actually isn't going to be, but you're still doing the current activity. I don't know, Hillary, if you had some examples kind of that, or any way to conceptualize, like, it's not a table anymore. What is it?
I don't really program that many tables of high expectations, because of most of my learners are like EFL adaptive goal type clients. So I feel like the non-table of high expectations comes a little bit more naturally to me, of like, you know, maybe we're skipping CAB 1, or maybe we're not skipping CAB 1, but we're skipping CAB 2, and we're using the context that we're in already, which may be a very decontextualized, SR-rich environment that doesn't not necessarily mimic what this is actually going to look like when we're done. And it may look like what you're talking about, where we are actually going to just do it when we're cooking dinner, or when we're not actually cooking dinner, right? But like in a practice session. So yeah, there's a question in the chat from Stacy. How would you suggest, whoops, went up there, programming for certain daily living skills that are triggers at home, but only happen once or twice a day? So I think one of the things I've learned is to wait till generalization for some of these things, if we have other things we can target first to build the skills and make that a CAB 6 or a generalization opportunity. But I have done SBT as a third or a fourth branch for something like toothbrushing or toileting, and you have to be very careful in your planning, because there are points in these chains where you can't stop. So you have to build up enough tolerance to where when you get to that point, right, like when you've gone to the bathroom, maybe you still have to wipe, or you still have to wash your hands, that you've had enough tolerance built up to that point, that when you go to reinforce, or when you get there, you can push to the next point and then reinforce. So you have to be really careful and cognizant of where your learner is and what you need to do to prep them for that. But I don't usually do that as my first, second, or third branch. That's usually a fourth branch or a generalization branch for me, once I know the learner has some tolerance skills, so that if I have to push them to wash their hands because they went to the bathroom, they're prepared for that, and they have built up this really robust skill set that maybe hasn't been applied to this chain, but we know is present. So that's what I've done. I have done generalizations to the shower. I haven't done generalizations to meals. They're usually later on in the process when my learners are really ready for them.
Yeah, I was just taking a peek at the chat too. Janelle, we'll get to your question about cabs for ritualistic behavior in a little while. But in terms of this question, I've also worked on it where we're not even necessarily going to actually do the full functional activity. I'm just saying, hey, it's time for dinner. That might be all that we're working on, where we're making it, as we go through the cabs, look like we're preparing for dinner, even if we don't actually eat dinner and we're not going to sit down for dinner, since the whole goal is that if the learner wants to avoid having dinner, well, we're going to be reinforcing with avoiding dinner anyway. So we might even like put our toys away, wash our hands, take off our shoes, go into the kitchen, set out the places to eat. And maybe that's like cab 5. At cab 6 is like sitting down and mom saying, which one would you like? And then we leave and we're not actually going to eat dinner. So
it's so fun to play with how you can break the chains down. And we have lots of examples of this later on.
Okay, next. All right.
We've talked about this quite a bit, but I mean, what does this look like in terms of these unique cabs? And Emily, I think, talks about this in such a beautiful way of, you know, really making it mimic the natural environment and not, and maybe not adding additional things. I tend to work with learners who do have pretty severe problem behavior. So when I'm running some of these more non-traditional cabs, I am using a very traditional synthesized reinforcement condition for safety, right? Because a lot of the learners I work with really require a really robust synthesized reinforcement condition, and that's okay. But we had talked about, right, like, first of all, little mug right there, our little it depends mug, which I think is just like our new little thing, and I love it. It just depends. So for some learners, you might need to have a really decontextualized synthesized reinforcement condition that they have to leave to engage in some of these cabs that we're going to talk about. In some of them, you can just have a really enriched synthesized reinforcement condition with the EO conditions included, and you stay in that condition as a whole. And we're going to talk about that a bit. And I think that really speaks to some of Janelle's questions, right? Like when you're working with like counter control or ritualistic behaviors, you cannot necessarily contrive those things to happen when exactly you want them to happen. And they just sometimes arise, and you have to be able to deal with them in the moment in the SR context. So it really, there's like, I feel like there's a spectrum of, you know, maybe a SBT light where you can just do it in the natural setting with nothing added, where maybe there's other cases where you need to kind of beef up your SR condition, you need to beef up your EOs and make things more contrived and slowly get more into that naturalistic setting as you go through generalization. So if you can avoid changing, and I like having this, Emily and I were talking about this last night. So she has this amazing perspective of and I love it because it so aligns with EFL2, right? Like keep everything as natural as possible because it will generalize so much faster. And in SBT, my point of view is keep everything as safe as possible because that is what my experience has been in working with very, very, very severe problem behavior. But there's no right answer, right? So if you feel that you don't have to add anything and you want to try to do one of these cabs without adding all the extra buff ups of synthesized reinforcement, that's okay, is what we're saying. It is okay to try to do that and see what you get, where you get with it. And you might have, I think one of the reasons we might beef up SR is you might not have enough motivational distance between your skill that you're trying to teach and the context that you're teaching in. And so you might need to beef it up so you have the motivational distance, because maybe just getting the red marker is not enough to handle the delay and the denial of that cab. But if it's the red marker plus some stickers, maybe it is, right? So thinking about what you need to do to make something have enough motivational distance for the skill that you're trying to teach, I think is a really important part of this particular discussion of how you decide about a contextualized or decontextualized SR and EO condition. That we're going to talk about some of those as we go through.
Yeah, and then one other thing there, so I'm thinking about a particular learner who would engage in some pretty unsafe behavior at a pretty escalated rate when there was the potential for parents' attention to be diverted. So, and this is one of our slides, but I just want to mention it because it's relevant to what you're talking about. So, mom gets a text, right? Ding, ding. Phone isn't on, you know, and this is one of the reasons why we do this process, right? Sure, we could ask mom to keep her phone on silent or to not have even the vibration on, but life happens, right? You're not going to remember that all the time. Sometimes your phone's going to go off in class and, you know, you have to apologize and move on with it. But so the phone would go off. This was a signal that attention was probably going to be diverted. And so my learner would begin a quick escalation into unsafe behavior, including like taking the TV and shaking it as if it was going to fall down, banging on doors and windows, to get mom to put the phone away. And that was enough. Putting the phone away was enough. The behavior would de-escalate as long, and you didn't even have to give him your direct attention. He could have been playing on his own, but the moment he's like, oh wait, you're not available as an audience member anymore because you might be responding to a text or answering the phone, that's a problem. So, so when we then started to work on programming for this, yeah, safety is a really big issue there, but if we shape by making the EO trigger really, really, really small and break it up, then we were able to do so where it was so, providing a reinforcement was so simple and easy that then the behavior de-escalated right away. So like the first step is the EO is the ding right in my pocket because I set it off on purpose. I don't even touch the phone. I don't even take it out of my pocket. As soon as the learner does the FCR, I say, oh, I'll answer that later. And I don't even take my phone out. So we started with these like, not even having the phone in my pocket. Sorry, I would start with like, it's in my bag across the room. So I don't even go get it. And so that way we started with kind of the most minimal, established the chain before we ever get to actually answering the phone, talking to somebody, waiting for the FCR, and then ending the conversation. So that's one option, and I know that there are some other hangouts and some other discussions about the importance of shaping. We'll talk about it a little bit here, but we can spend all day on that. So,
gotta micro shape those little tiny bits and pieces.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're gonna spend a few minutes talking about ethics. Okay, so one thing that I love about the SBT process is that we're taking a look at quite a few target behaviors when we're looking at these CAB branches. Not when we're looking at the problem behavior, you know, at the R1 and R2 level. Those are things that are often directly targeted for decrease. But when we're talking about the things that are triggers and the parts of the SR condition that the learner is engaging in problem behavior to try to access, those are often targets for decrease in ABA programs. And that can be done well or not so well. Of course, it just depends on the context and the learner and how you're programming that. But with this process, we're really not trying to target those behaviors. So we're not focusing on decreasing stereotypy or trying to treat OCD or stop somebody from engaging in the little rituals that make them happy. We're just working on what happens when you can't access those things or there's a denial to it, and does your reaction to that potential pause or break cause you to have more punishment, to have less reinforcement, or to engage in behavior that might endanger your health and safety or the health and safety of others. And so that's the goal here. And it then means that this process kind of is really applicable, like the EFL, to everyone. So there are a lot of learners that are going to have various forms of stereotypy as their main form of leisure skill, likely for their entire life. And this allows us to help make sure that they're able to do that in a safe and comfortable way, and that those things don't impede them from engaging in other skills that they need to learn for their health and safety and overall well-being and larger access to reinforcement. Anything else you want to say about that, Hillary?
I love this discussion because there is an undercurrent of dissent in the autistic community about the SBT process and ABA in general, about desensitization. So I really like the way that you frame that, because you wrote down here, improve outcomes for free, which is that, like, we're not trying to do that's not our focus, but sometimes we get byproducts that are really meaningful, meaningful outcomes, right? That make it so that sorry, I was just distracted by the chat. It's my way magic, right? Like, sometimes you target ritualistic behaviors are something that I like to talk about frequently. So maybe you're targeting the interruption of ritualistic behaviors, and the ritualistic behaviors continue to exist. They're going to stay there. We're not trying to get rid of them. But what happens is all of these opportunities that were maybe not available to the learner prior are now available, because those ritualistic behaviors do not evoke severe problem behavior in the community, or when trying to leave the house, or when it's time to take a shower, or all of these barriers that could put up because they can't be interrupted and they can't be left to come back to. So that's the improved outcome for free, is that you're teaching the skill, but then the translation is an opening of opportunity. And the ritualistic behaviors, whatever you want to call it, that or stereotypy, whatever, it's still there, and it's still accessible, and it's still a welcomed and embraced part of this person's life that is used in ways that I don't even know, like, it's contextually appropriate. I don't even know if that's the right word. Contextually appropriate or acceptable or okay to move on from sometimes.
Right. The other thing that I think about, particularly with the issue of desensitization, which is one I don't have as much experience as I would like to, but feel pretty strongly about, and is difficult to discuss online. Now, of course, I realize here we're having a discussion that's going to be recorded and shared on the internet. People are going to watch it and will not have necessarily been part of it. So that's always tricky. But what I find with a lot of my learners is, and there's a separate slide all about desensitization, so maybe we should shift over to that. But that we'll see that across the board with a lot of these behaviors that some people might target for decrease, and other people would say, what are you doing? Why are you targeting that? There's anything wrong with the person doing that. That when we're able to give people practice kind of accepting these little pauses, being able to take a breath and, okay, I don't have to touch this thing, I can actually do something else and then go and touch it. Or I don't like this sound, but I can tolerate this sound just long enough to let you know that I don't like it and get out of there safely. That I often find with the learners that I work with, that we now have the space in which to teach them to self-advocate, focusing on making sure that people can understand what they want and help them get there, but that also there are usually more nuanced things to it. It's not that you hate loud children. It's not that you can't stand dogs. There's a particular element of it that's aversive. And now, instead of unsafely fleeing anytime you might encounter that particular stimulus, now the learner is able to discriminate which one it is and flee the ones that actually bother them, and don't flee the ones that don't, and flee them safely. And then also sometimes they'll have the breathing room to find things that they actually like about something that might have previously been aversive. And then over time, they actually love that thing and really like it, but not because I had that as a goal for them, not because we purposely practice tolerating something you hate over and over and over again until you're just bowed down and be like, okay, well, I guess I like it now. But because you're able to kind of portion out those aspects of the experience and figure out, I really, really like this thing. I cannot stand this one. This one I'll stand just long enough to do something else that I really want, but I prefer not to. That they're able to have the skills to do that safely.
Such a good point. Thank you for coming back to it.
Sure. So now there's a little more about this. So one of the things that I like when we're thinking about which one is it here, and I see that there are some things in the chat. Awesome. Thank you for answering each other and talking in the side. So to me, one thing I love about the EFL assessment and curriculum is that we're looking first at things that are necessary for somebody's health and safety, and that when we're looking at whether desensitization might be appropriate for the person, that should be part of the target. So somebody who has a health condition in which they need to have their blood drawn every week, but they're also have needle phobia, working on needles as a desensitization target is socially valid because they're going to have to encounter them to stay healthy very, very regularly. And if they're not able to have less of a respondent reaction when they encounter that, then they're just going to continually hit upon the subversive situation over and over and over again. Now, of course, there are things that we can do to mitigate that, and of course, we should do all of those things. But when we're looking at things in the SVT process, we're not looking at actually desensitizing. We're looking at giving the learner the opportunity to escape or avoid that stimulus, and to effectively communicate their need to do so and staying safe while they're doing so. So when we're looking then at if the skill is essential, we might need to do some SVT process immediately on that thing. So I don't want a shot, right? We might need to work on avoiding the shot while an appropriate level of desensitization and accommodations are both worked on to make the actual shot process much easier for the person to tolerate. But when it's something that is not related to their health and safety, then we really want to look at, okay, well, do we need to target this? I don't know. What happens when the learner encounters this particular stimulus? Could we work with the family and the community to just say, you know what, let's not make them encounter this? And if it's something that only happens once in a while, or it's easy for accommodations to be made so that the learner is not taken by surprise with exposure, then maybe we just say, you know what, this is something where we're not going to target at all. We're just going to work on the accommodation side. But when it's something where when the learner encounters it fairly regularly, or when they encounter it, even if it's not that regular, and that often makes it worse when it's not that regular, that their behavior to try to escape or avoid it puts them in a potential safety risk or a risk for hurting other people, then I think it's really important to work on it as an SVT target, where our goal is helping them avoid or escape exposure to that stimulus in a safe way. That could be things like hearing a child who is loud in a close vicinity, and the learner has a fair amount of experience with children that make sudden loud noises or potential safety risks, and so the learner doesn't want to be around that. But in order to escape what they think might be a safety issue, they then run out the door into the parking lot. Or somebody who encounters a toy that has an element of the toy that they are scared of, that they really don't like, but they have so much panic when they encounter it that they don't actually leave, and they are kind of frozen in place and are not able to communicate to the people around them, I need help getting out of here because I'm too scared. So different things like that, where again, our goal is not making sure that you're not afraid of this particular lion stuffed animal, that's not a socially significant goal, but making sure that when you do encounter a toy like that, that you're able to get away from it in a safe and dignified manner. Okay. All right, so next we're going to talk a little bit about how you might or might not fill out the workbook a little differently when you're programming. I'm just going to pause for a moment and take a look at the chat to see if there's anything that's otherwise related to what we were just talking about.
I don't think so. Other than the phone, which was answered, I think. There's just a conversation for Shweta right now, and I want to let that keep going, and we can come back to it a little bit later,
sure.
I think.
So one of the things that's tricky about what we do is that there's always some sort of signal for the learner. So we need to figure out what it is. It could be that there's not something clear like a phone, but maybe a parent does a particular thing before they check their phone. So here's a good example, or a couple of examples. So I'm always losing my phone around the house. I work from home, and I don't have a big house, but I'm constantly looking for it. So if you watch me regularly, as my daughter does, you can probably figure out when I'm looking for my phone just by how I move when I'm going around the room, the places that I tend to feel, the way I tend to move my body. That would be a signal that I'm probably going to check it, and I might call somebody or be texting. So I bet there are things like that the child is noticing that no one else might. Let's see.
Felice has a good question. I recalled something Greg said about not necessarily nullifying the environment. How is that different than making accommodations so the learner doesn't encounter those things? I feel really strongly about this because we're still working with people who have needs, like significant, possibly for the rest of their lives, have needs that need to be accommodated, whether that's a physical need or a cognitive need, whatever, it does not matter. So there is going to be, like I have cases where it's likely that we're not going to target certain things. We are just going to accommodate because quality of life and deserving of an environment that is to their own desires, and I don't know, a school environment that is set up for them to be successful. Those are likely going to include some pretty significant modifications, and I'm not going to treat all of it. I'm going to treat the things that I need to treat in order for them to access more of the world and more of their life. And I will probably work on accommodations around the things that that maybe aren't the biggest target, aren't the most socially significant things. So for example, I have a client who wears headphones 24/7, and we're never going to ask him not to wear those headphones. That's going to be an accommodation probably for his entire life because they are so sensitive to noise. And we have worked on what you've talked about. I loved you talking about this because hearing bells or hearing loud noises unexpectedly would set off really significant levels of behavior. And so we actually ran SBT around noise desensitization. But truly what it is, you know, when you're at a high school or any school, middle school, high school, that has bells, they go off whether you want them to or not. And so what was happening is 6 to 10 times a day, we were going into ISO because the bell would go off even with all the accommodations, all the warnings, the headphones, everything. It didn't matter. It would cause huge escalations. And so we did do SBT around just tolerating until the bell went off. And we contrived that pretty heavily. And now it's not an issue anymore. But the headphones are still there. And a lot of those accommodations know it. We have a schedule on the board to know when the bells are going to come. We have coping mechanisms available specifically around the bell ringing schedule. And those headphones are available regardless of the time or the day or anything. So those accommodations are always going to be there for that student, or always going to be available whether or not he needs them or not. We're not going to try to decrease them or change them at this point.
Yeah, and I think so. This is still just an extension of that, but I've done this with clients where. So one thing that is very tricky to tell, and this we could have an entire hangout about this, but this is definitely part of this ethical aspect. So I do want to talk for another minute about it. Is it can be easy to jump to an assumption that somebody is physically or mentally is the wrong word, but the way that your brain is processing the sound is aversive. And that certainly could be true. And I would never say, oh, no, that's not it. But I've also seen with quite a few learners that their reaction to the sound is because of something else that the sound signifies. And when we jump to the sound being the issue, we don't teach them the skill they actually need, and we don't address the actual problem. And I'm not saying that that in any way is true for the client that you're talking about, but so I have one learner, so that example of the children being loud unexpectedly. Sure, it's easy to say, okay, let's have some headphones. We'll teach him to ask for headphones. We'll teach him to access the headphones and put them on by himself whenever he needs to. And we did that initially, and we had to do that in order so that he wasn't having that type of respondent stress reaction whenever he would hear a loud child in the proximity. We couldn't do anything else with that happening. But once we got to that point, we were then able to start teasing out, it's not the actual sound that bothers him. That's not helpful. He would calm down with the headphones because it was like a problem-solving thing we were doing. So because we were there helping the problem, he was actually avoiding the real aversive aspect, which was when you're in an environment with, in a more special education environment, and there's a child that is suddenly very loud next to you, that child is likely to engage in other unexpected behaviors like hitting you, taking your toy, running around, having a meltdown. And my learner did not want to be there for that. So it wasn't somebody being loud, it was what the loudness and the suddenness signified. So first we had to address it, not knowing what it was, just in a straight up, okay, we know this is an issue, let's just give him the tools to, we worked on leaving the room immediately or putting on the headphones. And then we started working more on teaching him to tell us what he needed before leaving. And then having that, just going through the cabs of, could we put our book on the shelf before we leave? Could we push in our chairs before we leave? And then we were able to start figuring out what it was. Until then, once we get to a certain point, he no longer needed or wanted to leave the environment if it wasn't somebody who was actually upset. But he never had the space to discriminate, is this an actual safety hazard or not? Because his initial reaction to the situation was the same regardless.
And that also makes me think of higher order, just in general thought is higher order conditioning, because sometimes something like the bell going off, we don't know the pairing history of that, right? So we did all the things to try to discover what it was, and it turns out it really is, there's nothing else, it's just the bell, right? But there's a long history of that bell. So what does that bell signify that it doesn't signify anymore, that is just stuck around? And that can be really difficult to figure out.
Yeah, and I like Megan's comment was saying, so children of domestic violence or in similar trauma situations, they have a whole history of behavior that may come from exposure to a particular stimulus where there is no actual safety hazard. And there, of course, again, we just want to help them learn to safely get out of a situation in which they're having that reaction. The last thing I want to say, and then let's move on about this, is again, back to the EFL. One thing that can be useful for determining those two things, like which we should look at, is the tolerance targets, especially in the essential 8 must-have skills, but also the should-haves, where any of the targets that are what they call eggshell skills. So when we're talking about Greg saying we should modify the environment or mollify it, for some learners, everybody tries to let's just avoid giving them exposure to that. And so everyone's walking on eggshells trying to avoid potentially that stimulus being in the environment. And when it's something you really can program for, that's fine. And when it's something where if everybody's walking on eggshells, but that stimulus really should be in the environment, or is going to continue to be when it's not under people's control. And so they're walking on eggshells, avoiding other community situations because of the chance that that thing might happen. And therefore that learner is missing out on health and safety activities, going to the dentist, other activities that they would really enjoy, but no one ever takes them there because of the off chance that the bus might hiss when, you know, the stairs lower and it has that hydraulic thing and it goes. So if there's a chance that the learner hears that on our outing and it really bothers them, we're just not going on outings anymore. So now the learner is missing out on all of these things that they would otherwise love to do because of that one thing. Then we might look at, okay, is that something that we could work on here?
We'll talk more about this when we actually look at what you had, so we should try to move on a little bit.
Yeah, sorry.
You're good.
Okay, so taking a look at the workbook, and I realized I should have just put a blank, should have put a blank copy of the workbook here, because likely people don't have a copy of them sitting in front of them like I do. But if we were on Zoom, I'd know how to quickly share what's on my iPad, but I don't know how to do that in GoToMeeting. So we just wanted to talk for a minute about what it might look like when you're filling out the treatment planning workbook for skills that are these more unique type of branches, and how that might change how we're doing the CABs. So I don't know, Hillary, do you want to talk about this page at all, or should I do it?
I can just quickly, I mean, really, I think, yeah, the really biggest thing is that you might not program for CAB 1 and 2. It might just go right from, oh, and you said something about it, there's always a signal. And for me, when I'm doing these CABs, I oftentimes try to do stimulus pairing with the signal that we discover is the signal to make a more salient signal initially. So the biggest difference is if you find your salient, you create a salient cue, and then you might skip CAB 1 and 2 because your salient cue might be like you're playing a game and you're letting the child decide how the game is played, and you're all of a sudden not going to let them do that anymore. And so your salient cue in the past would have been something pretty subtle, and now it's, hey, it's my turn to be the boss, maybe. And at that point, they're not gonna relinquish anything other than control, and they're not gonna transition anywhere because you're already playing the game. And so you're gonna go right into whatever that first step is, which might be, you got to put your pawn here. I changed my mind. I don't want to play the game that way. Whatever the lowest heat is that gets you what you need done. And that's going to be your first CAB, and that's going to be CAB 3. And so you might skip CAB 1 and 2. And CAB 3 might count as CAB 1. You can decide kind of how you want to lay this out and how you want to shape this out, depending on what your learner needs, because it depends.
Yeah, precisely. And like with the phone example, my cue might be, ooh, I should check my phone. Where there's no ding, I didn't even walk around looking for it, I haven't put my hand on my pocket, my phone is literally not in the room, but I'm just announcing it. And then like if this was something new, that might be immediately I'm prompting the FCR, like as soon as I said that. So okay, so let's look at the next one. And I think CAB 1 and 2, those are the most common that we would either just leave off altogether because we're not going anywhere or switching to a different activity, or we're just creative with what they look like. It could be sometimes that we just have the learner shift their physical orientation. Like turn like this instead of like this, something pretty subtle, so that they're still doing an extra step to delay before you reinforce, but it doesn't take them anywhere or require relinquishing or leaving the activity. So I might even ask a kid like, oh, hey, can you sit up a little bit? You know, like your back looks uncomfortable, or I might ask them to scooch over an inch so that I can reach something that's underneath them on the rug, and that's CAB too. Like, okay. Okay, I'll come to that. I'll come to your question in a second, Shweta. So 3 to 6, and I have some examples in here, so I won't talk about this too much here, but 3 to 6 might also look fairly different. And one of the main things that might be different is that you might have the learner not doing anything while the other person engages in 1 to 12 responses across multiple activities. So with the example of somebody having to go back in the house and grab something, all I'm asking my learner to do is just stay safely by the door while I walk up the stairs, reach for the doorknob and open the door. That's 3 trials in 1 activity. I step inside the house, open the closet door and grab my hat. That is a 2nd activity. And I pop my hat on, which is 1 trial in the 3rd activity. And there we go. We had CAB 4 and now we're moving on. Like, so
you could also measure that with what DITU calls time units of cooperation, or TUCs.
Yeah.
Gotta throw that in there. DITU, if you watch this, thank you for the name. Time units of cooperation, right? So maybe it's, you know, waits by the door, engaging in some, like, you have to make it clear what they should be doing and have a clear expectation for the interval for 5 seconds, 7 seconds, 10 seconds, or however you need to break it down for those initial CABs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that I think the framing it that way, it makes it easier to collect data on how the learner is progressing. My way, so to speak, makes it easier for the instructor to figure out what to do. So you wouldn't necessarily put what I'm talking, my way of doing it, you wouldn't necessarily put that into your data sheet. Your data sheet might be time units of cooperation, but while the learner is waiting for those amount of times, you need to ensure that the other person is engaged in meaningful, contextually appropriate activities that would normally be happening. And especially if it's the SVT context, I'm not going in for something I really need. I didn't actually leave my phone behind. I don't need a hat, so it doesn't matter if I have to stop or switch to do something else. And it might even be, oh yeah, I got to get my hat. Oh no, it's hot. I don't need a hat. They just waited for 5 seconds. I didn't actually get a hat, and out we go. Like, so that what constitutes an activity, we're being really flexible and imaginative with that based on what's actually happening.
And I'm going to jump in because I just want to talk about number 4 really fast. It's like the perfect opportunity that sometimes you're going to have to be creative on the spot. Like, I have some CABs where I can't tell people what it is, what the CAB is. It's just 1 activity, 1 direction, 2 direction, 3 direction, 4 directions. And maybe I'll give them a list of ideas, but generally they might have to just come up with it on the spot because that's just what's happening right now, right? Like, it's not a table of high expectations, and the SR context might be really naturally in the natural context. And so it doesn't make sense to really break it down like that because they might be doing something over here or something over there or not doing anything that has any activities or anything to relinquish at all. So you might skip CAB 1 in this trial, but on the next trial you would run CAB 1. So I love number 4 on this slide because I think it really illustrates the flexibility of this program and how you can train people to be flexible to implement it.
Yeah, definitely. And that was something I encountered when I was working on doing examples in the workbook for these branches that we'll be talking about soon, we promise. I found what I actually ended up doing was writing several of them out for basically 1 specific instance of an EO. Because for most of these, I can't write out what it's going to look like ahead of time, because what would be contextually appropriate and what types of things I'd ask the learner to do really are unique to that situation. So again, giving whoever's doing the treatment, giving them ideas, giving them classes of things you can expect the learner to do, and helping them learn to use their imagination. And again, look within 4 or 5 feet, 3 or 4 feet around them, and just pick stuff from there. Like, they don't have to come up with really complex things. So this was just to highlight the passive versus active, and I will, because whenever we do any of these, I always think of some other things I want to add in, so I'll do that before the slides, but I'll put a little bit about the tucks here, because I think that it is a nice operational definition, and it helps people clarify which they're doing. So that helps with data collection. So depending on the EO, depending on the context, I might just ask the learner to sit there while I do things. But it could be one trial. I say, oh, hey, can you pass me that pen? And trial 2 is a time unit of cooperation. So once they've passed me the pen, now I'm writing something on the board. Like, so at the clinic where I work, we have different clients and therapists. So if we go out, whatever room we're using, we write on the board like who I am, where we're going, when we'll be back, and my phone number. So for the learner to be super excited to go outside, but they have to wait while I write that information on the board before I can open the door, that might be part of the things that I'm asking them to do before I open the door and we go outside, which is the reinforcement. And then the last item on here is making sure that we're talking, as long as that wouldn't be a trigger as well, but that we're talking through these things out loud for the learner. And I see this happen so much where kids don't get to experience the problem solving and the thinking through things that we all do in our heads. We all self-narrate through the things we're doing. Okay, so I gotta go to the grocery store. Oh shoot, I better bring that coupon. I'm doing that all in my head. The kid sees me, hey, why aren't we going outside? I want to go to the grocery store. And they don't realize that I'm actually engaging in these things while we're delaying going out. And so if we do those out loud, especially for any of these passive responses, then we're helping the learner understand, for a lack of a better word, a little bit more why we're not going outside, but also helping them see all of the things that are involved with going. So, got to find my keys. Did I leave them here? No, I didn't. Oh, where could I look for them? Hey, can you look under your chair and see if they're there? And like that process then kind of engages, so they're not just passive, they're also being engaged in that waiting process.
All right. I have a time, really quick, I have a time units of cooperation example. I have a family I'm working with to teach their child to just do, it's like almost a classic DRO, but do something else while I make dinner, right? Anything that's not problem behavior, I guess. So it's like a DRA. It has to be meaningful. It has to be engaged. It has to be contextually appropriate. And it's all a time units of cooperation, but there's like a specific space that the student needs to stay in, and the family is doing very specific things. And it's not actually dinner time, but we're practicing this all the time, and we call it our be alone cab. So it's time to be alone. I want my way, not right now. Thanks for saying okay. I'm going to have you be alone. And then we outline our expectations, which is our cab 1. And then our cab 2 is us walking away to a certain point in the room. And then our cab 3 starts our time units of cooperation. And that's a variable time schedule. So what is important about the time units of cooperation for that is the learner needs to be in that space, engaging in very particular activities that we have identified as things he's capable of doing on his own and independently, and in absence of any of our target behaviors. So that's kind of how we have identified what it looks like to be correct in a time unit of cooperation. It's not just waiting. It's contextually appropriate waiting. The learner needs to be doing something while he's waiting.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. That's a great example. And I love the concept of cab 2 being the instructor or the caregiver leaving the situation rather than the child doing it.
And I see your question. So we stay in view. The kitchen is right next to, but there is a space in the house where the child can be alone, and it's a very accommodated space. where kind of anything goes as long as they stay in that space that's out of sight. That's the only place that they're out of sight.
And then, yeah, Shweta's question about the specified mans. Once again, here's my it depends mug. So for some learners, that might actually be the C in FCR. So the SFCR might be, because depending on the learner and their skills, hey, excuse me, Miss Emily, can I have my way? Is the FCR, and then the CFCR is me being like, sure, what is it? And then they say, I want to blow bubbles while you sing happy birthday. And for other learners, teaching them to give us that more specific information then might be something that's either part of a CAB 5 or a CAB 6, depending on where they are, right? If getting more specific when I'm really stressed that I'm not going to get my way is challenging, then that's probably going to be a CAB 6. If you are happy to tell me exactly how you want me to put the Lego pieces and why I was so bad to put them in the wrong spot, then that's probably not a CAB 6. That's probably either the CFCR or maybe a CAB 3 is before I reinforce it, you need to tell me more about what it was that you were looking for. So.
We also have a slide about spontaneous requests, which is one of my favorite ways to teach specified manding within this program.
Yeah. Okay, so let's take our little break.
Should we take a break, or should we just keep going, because it's getting kind of late and I don't want to. Yeah. Does anyone have any strong preferences to take a break?
Keep going. All right.
Okay.
Okay, so the last slide that we have before we get to the examples are just some pitfalls, potential ones. Let's see. Okay, so a few of these are things that are not related specifically to these type of CABs, but just in general with the process. But I see them coming across more in these situations where if staff are relying on your written list of what to do for each step, they're going to have a hard time figuring out what would be appropriate tasks and activities to do under these various conditions. And so I'm really helping people see how to contrive those situations so that they happen at a much higher rate than they would happen naturally, and that you can ensure that you can reinforce them, and which you can't do when these things happen in real life, which is often why they're EOs, because most of the time mom says yes, and once in a while she says no, or whatever it is. And that programming by stimuli classes also helps ensure variety. So we're not programming for what to do when somebody else comes and draws on your picture, but we're programming what to do when a project that you worked on is destroyed or irrevocably ruined or changed in some way, which could mean a Lego thing you built, it could mean an art project you did, it could mean a drawing that you made for somebody, a science experiment that you made when mom let you play with the stuff in the spice cabinet. So whatever that is, then we're practicing the skills across that class so that the learner is experiencing lots of different types of ways to have the same EO, and they're all following the same chain. So they're all ending successfully. And then we've done a lot of generalization as we teach. That's not going to work for every learner, and that's not going to work for every type of situation. And sometimes we really need to just program for one and get that looking really good before we program, before we expand on that. But what I find for a lot of learners that are in less modified situations where they're more likely to encounter a variety of behaviors, responses from other people, unexpected answers from people, unexpected behavior from peers, then the more we program generalization from the get-go, the easier it is for them to tolerate when this new way that somebody destroyed my artwork happens. And then my old favorite, people thinking they've said no when they really said yes. That happens a fair amount with staff that are maybe they're sort of following the letter of SBT, but they haven't quite gotten the spirit of it. So, and then we talked about the last one already. So, oh, and the first one, so the first one is just something that I've seen with kids that have, tend to have more ritualistic ways of playing, or they have certain ways that they like to play with their toys, and typically adults coming over as a CMOR because there's a history of people messing with their toys or interrupting their play. And so when you try to come over and play with them, they tell you to go away, they throw pieces at you. Not because they actually don't want you to play with them, but because there's a history there of what happens when people come over. And so sometimes what will happen is when we're working on SBT for that particular type of reinforcement, whatever the cause may be, there's a tendency for staff to withdraw themselves every time they're providing reinforcement, and really like completely withdraw when that's not always necessary for safety and televisability and rapport, and actually can be pretty damaging to rapport, because then you're teaching somebody, hey, guess what? I'm going to come in to play with you. When you tell me go away, I'm just going to go away. And then we never get the chance to actually learn to play with each other or have fun. And there are lots of ways that I cannot mess with your stuff, but I'm going to come and sit 3 feet away and play with a similar set and have fun with it. Or I'm going to go about the room and do my business, but I'm going to walk by every 30 seconds to a minute and compliment your play or say something cool about it without requiring anything from you and without touching your stuff. So there's lots of different ways that we can help staff to not condition themselves as aversives inadvertently.
I think that's one of the things I love most about the SBT process is that, well, I love a lot of the things. I don't know if I should say that anymore because I say that a lot. I do love, though, that when you're running this and you are reinforcing and moving between SR and EOs, that becomes easier and easier to do. Over time, you build that trust and you build that rapport to where the child or the client, whoever it is more comfortable allowing you to be within proximity and more comfortable with you being in their space and touching their things, because you've shown them over and over that I am not going to do the things that are going to upset you. Or I'm going to try not to anyway. So happens.
Okay. All right, so this is just a partial list of all of the idiosyncratic branch types that might exist out there. I'm not going to read it, it's just there in the slides. And now we're just going to go through. We have one slide for each of these types, and then for, I think, 4 of them, there are some workbook examples of how we might look at the CABs for that. So.
Stacy, I just saw your, I'll answer it really quickly. Sometimes I think we can get a little too black and white and rule governed around what we're supposed to do in SBT. And so I just want to tell everyone to just be comfortable being flexible. Like so I'm actually doing some balance with my own child. And so I was showing someone the video and I'm offering him a lot of choices and I'm actually delivering some instruction. But that's because I know him so well. I know all the antecedent strategies to keep him HRE. Whereas for him, if I were sitting there and not engaging and offering choices and asking him before I touch his stuff that he wants me to play with, that would be an EO for problem behavior. So ideally, you're following the child's lead. And if a child doesn't want you to be interacting or initiating, then you're not doing that. But if you do that and they want you to do more of it, you're going to do more of this. And there was a thread recently about like learning that a child really likes negative attention. And sometimes it takes us a while to figure these things out, but you're not going to wait for them to initiate for negative attention. You're going to try to provide it in a way that they no longer have to engage in problem behaviors to access that negative attention, which means you're going to be initiating before they're asking for it. So it very much depends. It should just be child-led. So if child-led is don't talk to me, don't touch me, don't come near me, then that's what you're going to do. But if child-led is wrestle me to the ground and make me lose, and then be dramatic in letting me win like a knight in shining armor, but I have to tell you and direct you to do all those things, or you have to ask me for those very specific commands to know how this play goes, but that's my HRE, that's okay too. And that should be encouraged and welcome, but the child should be able to tell you that either with their words or with their behavior in any way that they need to communicate those needs to you.
Yeah, and those are perfect to work in as, I think, so I can't remember if Hanley had come up with, like officially added this in, but I add freebies in as trials interspersed, where a freebie means the adult they create the EO, or if it happens naturally, they recognize the EO, they publicly recognize it, and they ensure that reinforcement is provided without the child having to do anything. So I'll even do that in my programming. So I have one learner who does not like me. I'm a very goofy person. I'm going to like, oh, look at my new hat, and I'm going to make silly jokes and pretend things are silly. And when he's not in a silly mood, he really finds that aversive. That's very good to know. It was helpful for me to actually practice those things so that I could keep that in mind. So what I would start to do is make it look like I was going to tell a joke or use something funny. Oh, right. You don't like it when I'm goofy with that stuff. Okay, I'll stop. And then I just move on to something else. And Beth's question, I wasn't saying that we shouldn't add in things, but that we need to be mindful of whether what we're adding in is necessary for HRE and safety, or whether it is extraneous and then complicates removing it later, or complicates the child reaching HRE when in a natural situation that those extra elements are not provided, but the actual EO is removed. The other thing with that too, and this, again, this is sort of separate just about the SBT process in general, but that sometimes if people add in things that just for example, child likes watching videos on the iPad, but they like doing lots of other things as well. But because that was part of their HRE condition in the PFA, and then it worked for some things, the iPad got added, like watching a video on the iPad got added into the SR condition during a lot of different types of situations, where now the learner is spending a lot of time watching the iPad and having problem behavior when the iPad is denied, and that was not an issue before. So yeah, so you have to try to assess carefully and look for those patterns early on in the process. Because yeah, we can create these sort of rituals and routines that we didn't realize we were doing. Okay. All right, so let's talk about some of these specific types of cabs. So who's the boss is our first one, and this one's for you, Hillary.
Who's the boss? I like this one. So really, you're talking about learners who just want to be in control and be in charge. And this is when it's likely you're going to have to ask them in your SR condition what they want you to do. You're not going to be able to know. They're going to have to specifically tell you exactly how to do things. And so you're not going to be letting it be completely, it will be child-led, but they'll be adult initiated. So they know that they are in charge. So they want to call the shots. I did my first ever enhanced choice PFA. I was playing Uno with a learner, and they were so surprised that I let them decide the rules for the game. Like, all of a sudden, I had the entire deck in my hand, and I could never change the color. And no matter what I did, he would win. And this kid was like on cloud 9 that he could tell me exactly how I was supposed to play this game according to him, so that I could never win. And so then our EO was, sorry, the rules of the game have changed. Now we have to play the normal way. Or, sorry, the rules have changed, maybe trying to mimic up here. Now we have to play by my rules of the game, which are still not the normal rules of the game. But now I'm winning all the time and you're losing all the time, right? So that you can get really creative about how to do that. Making big or small decisions. It can be as big as what we are doing for work or finishing work. Janelle, I don't know if you're still here. She literally just left. what we are, or choosing what movie we're watching, or as small as where your feet should be on the floor, or what you should be doing, what if you should wear your jacket or not, or if when you're outside, if you should run or walk. Today I was on a walk with the learner who wanted me to be tied up and play cops and robbers outside. And so he was the boss in that moment. And then our EO was, the game's over, it's my turn to be the boss. And so I chose what game we were playing. So they want to feel like they're empowered to be a decision maker in all things that are going on. And sometimes I feel like these learners, little EOs, are really missed, and we really miss tiny little idiosyncratic things that don't seem like a big deal but are actually a really big deal, like where the chair is, or who stands where, or what that blue is now green, right? Like these little tiny things that to us just seem like not a big deal, but really if you don't include them and don't make provisions for them to be in the SR condition, will not allow your client to reach HRE, and therefore you're going to have a lot of EOs that you're not planning for, and then problem behavior. And so when you're doing this with a child who wants to be the boss, or a learner who wants to be the boss, what SPT has taught me is that you really strip everything else away, and you're really digging in to find what thing about being the boss, or what part of control might be missing, and why is this behavior happening here, and what might I need to think about in this context to ensure that they're getting this control in that way, or in another way to make it more safe. We might need to shape some of that up. So who's the boss? And your CABs for this, I don't know, I think that's the next slide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have another one. I wanted to just throw one comment in there. So one of the things that I've seen that's tricky sometimes about identifying this is learners where it's a bit like you give a mouse a cookie, and if that's missed, which it often is by parents or teachers who don't have as much experience with this type of behavior, people spend a lot of time trying to comply with demand and get the child what they want. And it's never right. It's the wrong shape. Now it's the wrong color. You put too much in the glass. Oh, now you spilled some. I don't want this after all. And so helping people realize that actually the tangible, or the thing they're escaping, or the thing they're getting, those things are not relevant really. It's the you doing what they said that's real. That's the important part. So
yeah, Dr. Haley talks about kids liking making adults sweat. Making adults sweat is a reinforcer, right? So you can, I find this very easy to contrive, because what you can do is, instead, when they ask for something that is reasonable, that you can give them, that you know that they want, you can make some limits around it and then reinforce those limits, because that control piece is actually what is in play. It's not the thing. It's not that I want you to be the blue guy. It's that I want you to sweat and not like that I'm in charge. And so when I say, now you're blue and I'm red, and I'm like, I don't want to be blue. And they're like, but I'm the boss. And I oftentimes tell my learners, you're the boss right now, so you get to make the rules, but I'm the boss. I'm like, well, I really don't want to maybe make a little bit of a stink about it. And they're like, well, I said, I'm like, fine, I'll be the blue guy. That's fine. Like, I hate the color blue, but I guess I'll be the blue guy. And that's all it took, right? And so trying to contrive those opportunities early and frequently in your SR condition, before they're looking for the thing that is the give the mouse a cookie, to find those limits and to get that exchange with you, will solidify an HRE and SR context that is treatable, versus chasing the tail of chasing your own tail. It's like carrot in front of a horse, right? So if you can do it early and often and embed it into your SR context, it will be more effective that way, because it is really the exchange, the man compliance, the attention component that's a part of that's the synthesized reinforcer. I can't really see this, so I'm going to let you read it.
Sorry. Okay.
It's okay.
So I'm saving all of these workbook examples as I'll just put it in as a specific PDF, or save it as a PDF, and then we'll share that as well.
Really quick.
So yeah.
Police said something in the chat. This is really hard with the learner who doesn't have a lot of language or the language to tell us. And I think that's really true. And I'm gonna call someone out who's on this call with us right now. There's a man on the video screen, John, right down there in the corner for me. He is the master of working with students who cannot vocally tell him what they want him to do and figuring it out. It is paying attention to the context of what is occurring, what the chain of the behavior looks like, and sometimes a lot of guesswork. But once you identify it, then again, so my example is he has a student who likes to clap, and that signals John that he should clap. There's no other way the student has ever been able to tell us this other than us missing that cue, and then aggression occurs. John figured this out, and so now he preemptively offers a clap during SR, and the student engages in the clap, and then sometimes the student requests the clapping, and there's no longer any associated problem behavior with that specific man that he is trying to get John to engage with him in. So it takes, you have to be a detective, like you have to really take everything apart, pick it apart, and find what it is. And I just wanted to give John a big shout out because I watched him do this today, and I even told him every time I watch him work, I learn something about what he's doing and how he's learning what his students are trying to tell him, and it's really a beautiful thing to watch. So anyway, it is harder, but it's worth it.
And of course, then doing this process, especially if we've mastered it with something other than that, that's clearer, then when you start doing it with those types of things, everybody can take a breather, because the learner knows, okay, they're going to figure it out. I know that my man will be reinforced, even if I have to wait a little bit, even if I have to let the adult do some detective work. I know it's gonna work. So then they're not having
tolerance.
That escalation.
That builds tolerance, and then we build a cab chain around it too, so that when they are manding for that clap or whatever the issue, whatever that man compliance is, sometimes we do have to delay it, right? We're not always going to have a John there to do the clapping. So we actually build a cab branch around this where he does the request for a clap, and we deny it as a spontaneous request cab, and we deny it, and we move from there into delayed with tucks to tucks, time units of cooperation before reinforcing the man for the clapping. So that piece of SR that is so important for this learner isn't always going to be available, and there isn't always going to be someone who knows how to do it for them in the exact way that they want them to, or understands that they're even requesting it. And so we also need to teach, just like you talked about earlier, Emily, teach them to learn to communicate that better, but also tolerate when they can't, or when the context isn't fitting for what they are looking to do. And that's important for aspects of SR that can't translate out of that synthesized condition very easily. So my little.
So I think we're probably going to finish in like 2 hours now. We're going to go a little over, because I don't think we'll finish in 9 minutes. But if we try to finish by 7:15 our time, then the people on the East Coast at least won't have fallen asleep yet. So, so with this example, there's a learner who is manding for what they want you to do with their pawn, or you choose this color, something like that. It doesn't matter. This is just an example. So cab 1 is merely, they're not making it happen. There's just a bit of a pause. There is no cab 2. We're playing the game. We're not going anywhere. So cab 3 is within the game. I'm not taking the pawn they told me to, and I'm not even necessarily taking a different pawn, because that would be a little too much, but I'm doing other contextually appropriate things for the game. So I might say, oh, hey, can you pass me the spinner? Like, oh, wait, I forgot. Is this a 2-player or a 3-player game? They answer that. And then, oh, man, the spinner's not working, right? It is. I just flexed the bottom of it, so now it's not working. So I asked them to help me fix it, because that might be a strength skill of theirs, and they like helping adults, and it's also something that would happen naturally in the game. And, oh, thanks. You know what? I will take that blue pawn. Thanks for the suggestion. Like, So that would be a cab 3 if we kept going and we were on a cab 4. So again, it just depends on what was actually happening. So let's say we were still setting up the game, right? I might have them help me move the box lid. We might count out the number of tiles we might need. We might pass out tiles for the different players. If we were at the stage of, so I'm not doing this, I've written this out as 3 separate activities. They're all parts of playing a game, but depending on which one you're actually doing when it happens, you might need to start there and then do the units of cooperation within that level and the next level, because you're not going to go back a level. So you have to be a little creative here. But then there's some examples here, like if you're actually planning out the game, you might talk about which version to play, see if there's enough pieces, invite a friend, all of these things where I haven't yet. So if, let's say the learner is asking me to, they want me to pick blue. If I pick red and we start playing the game, that's actually like a cab 6, right? I've said, no, I've picked something else and we're moving on. And for a lot of learners, that would be a signal that there's no reinforcement coming for their man. And I now have they pick up the game and throw it across the room, right? So I have to be creative to think about what can I do to delay saying yes, but it's still things that we would need to be doing in the game. We might even then, for a cab 5 or even part of cab 6, we might actually pause the game and do some other things relevant to the game. Like if I realize we're missing one of the pawns, we're going to go look in the room to find it. We might even make a pawn out of some other material or look for a Lego we can use instead. We might realize, oh gosh, the instructions are missing. Can you help me print them out from the internet? Like there's ways we can be creative to be doing more trials and yet not have actually started playing the game yet. So depending on the learner and kind of what they can tolerate. And then there's some examples of ways you could set up cab 6. So we kind of make it look more like we're going to play. Like I like my example. So if the learner wants me to be red, I write on the scoreboard, Emily, blue. That makes it look like I'm not going to be red, but then I am, right? I might make some other elements of the game harder or deny another request that they have and ask them to tolerate that before I say yes to their man for me to use the right color pawn.
But not doing it might be your cab 6.
Right. Okay, so that was, that's just one example. Like we could come up with lots of different ones, but then we'd be here all night. So, okay, so here is the next one. So this one, I took this photo of my daughter's shrine tonight. This is her little potty training stool, and she has what she calls treasures. She's almost 2. And these are all important things to her. So there's other treasures, these aren't all of them, but she likes to arrange them just so in different places in the environment. And you don't go be touching them and moving them around and taking them away. And if she realizes Goose is missing, that could be a problem. You got to find Goose. Getting things just so or something where I might then in the SBT process purposefully remove Goose. I know where Goose is, but I'm going to help the learner tolerate that their shrine is missing a piece, and we're going to do some other stuff, and then we're going to find Goose. If they like things sort of just so, when they have their French fries, they just absolutely like to drench them in ketchup. So maybe when we are putting the food out on the plate, there's not enough ketchup for it to be drenched that way. Completing the incomplete. So kids who really like all the puzzle pieces to be in, and a puzzle that's missing one piece is, it's much more valuable to have that last piece than a puzzle that has half the pieces only out of it. So any of these kind of rituals, again, the goal is not to stop them from doing the ritual or prevent them from doing it, but in real life, there's going to be lots of different reasons that we have to wait. The puzzle piece is missing. We have to do something else before we can go and push in all the drawers that we saw in the hallway that were sticking out. And we need to tolerate not being able to do those things while we do some other things until we can do them. So I see this a lot with quite a few learners, more so with learners that have less vocal verbal language, but a lot with learners who do, and we all have things like this, right? This isn't anything unique to someone who has a diagnosis, but we're going to see it affect their lives a little bit more when they're coming to us for some of these issues. So here's the example that I had here is, and this is a real one. So we had a poster up on the wall and people took down the poster and left some bits of tape on the wall. The learner noticed the tape that was on the wall, and now they will run away from their most favorite activity, rush across the room, step on a friend, trip over the chair, or hurt their shin just to get the tape off the wall. Because tolerating seeing that something is wrong in the environment and not being able to fix it right away is so aversive that now there's quite a few challenges that happen. So in this example, what might CAB 2 look like? Well, it depends on whether we're actually doing an activity or were we like making a transition or moving around in the room. So if we were not engaged in something else, I might actually ask them to transition to another activity, like walk over to the cubbies to get ready for a snack, walk to the door to go to the bathroom, go get in line. If we were staying in place, I might just ask them to turn their body, sit up a little taller, sit down or up, move their arms, something small, just to, especially with these particular types of behaviors, not having somebody play the game exactly the way that you told them to. Not always, but a lot of times the ability to have that as a EO situation means that you have more skills in terms of communicating and problem solving and navigating social situations, and you're less likely to have this type of potentially like respondent stress reaction to seeing something that's wrong or off or having your ritual be changed, and you're less likely to have the language skills to be able to communicate that with someone, right? I can say, oh, there's a bit of tape on the wall, can I go get it, right? Whether I tolerate you saying no or not, I'm more likely to be able to tolerate than someone who doesn't have those skills and has to rush over and grab it. So having these this ability to tolerate just a little bit of a delay can really help. And then here are some examples of what it might look like with a CAB 3, where given an example, there might just be simple tasks that are just related to the thing that we're actually doing. And then as soon as they've opened the lunchbox, I say, oh yeah, there's that tape over there. You want to go take it off? And they can stop what they're doing and go deal with it. But now they have had that kind of breath, so they're likely to now walk across the floor safely, or if they're in a hurry, they're not in a panic anymore, they're going to be able to go do it. So 4 and 5 are just extensions of 3. And then for 6, for this particular type of branch, I would look at situations they're likely to encounter naturally that are going to make the appearance of tape on the wall a little more aversive. So maybe we're doing those tasks closer to the tape. So it's like right there, I could just reach out and take it off the wall, but I can't because I need to get my lunch open. Maybe we're using that task in our activity. So they're having a reminder of the thing that they want to fix or touch. Maybe I notice that there's a second piece of tape on the wall and I either point it out or I make sure that they've observed it. Maybe we have something else in the environment that's potentially aversive, like a loud peer. Again, all of these things are things where you want to do this very carefully to ensure that it's not too triggering, and you'd want them to be very successful with CAB 5 before you do this. And then when you're choosing the things for CAB 6 that are like the kinds I'm talking about, you're really thinking about what would they be likely to encounter in real life so that we're not being jerks. And when we do it, we're doing it not in a ooh, I see another piece of tape over here, but we're doing it in a way that acknowledges that it makes it clear that we understand that it's something that bugs them and we are empathetic about it, because part of the process is they know we're going to help that. And so for some learners, it might even be, I'm pointing it out because in CAB 6, as soon as they tolerate me pointing out the second one, I'm then going to help them go over and take both of them off really quickly. So. Okay. All right, next one. Stereotypy. Okay, I will try to keep this brief. I like in the EFL, R8 is a requests and a listener responding 8 in a hierarchy. 1 through 4 are a preference assessment. 5 is making choices in a preference assessment. So it's almost close to the very beginning of the assessment. And R8 means asking to engage in stereotypy or asking people for the things that you need to do it, so that we ensure that people don't need to engage in problem behavior in order to access the whatever activities are that they like to engage in. And that comes, sorry, I just need to plug my computer in. That comes pretty early on in the process of skills, so that we're recognizing how important a skill that is for people. So again, here we're not targeting decreasing stereotypy. We're looking at when people can't engage in it for whatever reason, can they tolerate a denial or a delay? Or if they don't have the thing that they need, can they communicate to get that need and accept a little bit of delay in it? Again, this is just a picture of my daughter. So she likes to go to the park and she takes leaves and pine cones and things like that, and she rips them up into little pieces. She calls them pieces, and she lays them out on the log. And then she'll sweep them off with her hands, and she'll pick up more and she'll start again. I've seen similar behavior in some of my clients with wood chips or dirt or things like that. So she needs the nature materials, and she also needs a specific, she likes a log or a rock to put them on. So both of those things are necessary, and I want to make sure that she has the FCR skills to be able to ask for one of those if she doesn't have it, and then accept naturally occurring delays or denials. So when we went to park the other day and we went over to her favorite log, there were people sitting on the log, and we could not use it because of COVID. We couldn't share it. They didn't have masks on. And so she had to tolerate having to go and play at a different part of the park while we waited for them to leave. And then we were able to go over to the log. So that was like a perfect example of, she wasn't happy about it, but she was able to go along with me, go play elsewhere using a different rock for this. And then when it was free, we went down there and used it. So really looking to getting help to fix the environment, or getting something that you need, but then if there's a delay in getting that, being able to tolerate that. Okay.
I'm just going to do a quick plug here because FTF just dropped their stereotypy CEU. So they also have a full CEU talking about treatment of stereotypy using SBT.
So next we have avoiding the novel, and this one has your name on it.
Oh, it does? I wrote down add the novel. I'll take this one though, that's cool. No, I feel bad. I was like, man, I wish I'd gotten adding the novel instead of avoiding the novel instead of adding the novel. So this is great. Sticking to the same routines and sticking to the same items. So when I think about this, I think about, I have a client who has very particular bathroom routines they need to do every single time they use the bathroom. The problem is that when we go in the community, a lot of the bathrooms don't have the things that are needed to complete that ritual. So when we encounter those things, we will oftentimes see severe problem behavior, which is part of the reason why this client does not get to access the community. It's one of many, but we need to be able to teach this person to encounter an environment that does not have everything that they expect or is not everything that they're used to, and tolerate it and work through it in a way that's going to, they might not be happy about it. I loved how you said that about your daughters. Maybe they're not happy about it, and that's okay, but it's not going to cause an escalation to the point that limits their abilities to access the environment in the community. When I think about writing CABs for this, I think of doing it in one of two ways. And one of them is helping, like taking an existing routine and an existing environment that's already occurring and making it novel, like adding something into the routine or making something unavailable in the routine. So for example, if they want a very specific type of soap available, maybe that soap is not available. And our CFCR, and when we're maybe complexifying MANS, is going to be asking for that soap to be made available, and we will do that initially. But ultimately, right, like maybe we don't like foamy soap, but when we go in public now, most soap is foamy. So, and ultimately what happens is in the bathroom, there's foamy soap, or the towel's not hung the way that they want it for when they get out of the shower, or the type of washcloth. This happens to me all the time. I also have, we all do this, right? Like I have routines in my hygiene. So for example, I like very particular washcloths, wash my face, but sometimes they're not clean and I have to go for the secondary kind of crappy washcloths that I don't really like, but I do it because I need to wash my face. So that would be another example, is maybe they like a floof, or they have whatever they call those, loofah, or they have one of those back scrubbers to scrub their back, and that's not there. And so that routine is disrupted, and either that thing will not be made available because maybe it's broken or it's gone or it's lost, or there's no one around and you're wet and there's not enough towels to get out with, and or if you ask someone, they can get it for you, but maybe it might not be right away because maybe mom's in the middle of cooking and she can bring it to you in 5 minutes, or or maybe the dryer is about to go off and so you have to wait to wash your face, or whatever it is. So you can do that way in an existing routine. You can also do this as a generalization where it happens in the natural environment, where maybe there's a bathroom that is the bathroom that is the perfect one for the ritual. And that's the one they want to go to, but instead you're asking them to go to a different bathroom. And so in that context, you might say, I want to go to the bathroom. Let's say, for example, the bathroom with a particular type of toilet. And I say, that one's not available. We're going to go to this one over here that doesn't have that type of toilet. And then they're going to admit the FCR, and we're going to work through it that way, wherever we're at in our treatment. But ultimately, at the end of the day, our CAB 6 is that actually that bathroom with the toilet that you really want is out of order and we cannot go in it. So we actually do have to use this other one that you don't prefer as much, but it's going to happen anyway, and we're okay with that. We might not be happy about it. It might not be perfect, but it doesn't limit our access to the community because it's such a big barrier for us to engage. And I think we all have clients and have encountered students who have rituals or sticking points around what they eat, what they do, how they do it, what they wear, and this applies to that too. And I think about this and I treat it similarly to kind of ritualistic behaviors, except that when you're thinking about like clothing or daily living habits, once you complete it in the way that's not meant to be completed in, or how the learner expects it to be done, they can't go back and necessarily fix it, right? Like at the end of this treatment, maybe they are going to have to wear clothes, for example. Shweta, you were talking about this, right? Like maybe they will need to wear that piece of clothing that they don't prefer, but is necessary for whatever reason. Maybe we're going to the snow, or maybe we're going to the doctor's office and we have to wear a gown, or any of these things that could come up that are maybe not preferred events, but then once we can't actually restore the environment. So I think that can be really difficult with this avoid in the novel. Like once I take you to that other bathroom and we go to that other bathroom, I'm still not going to make the bathroom you prefer available. That's still not, it's not necessarily going to get to be reinforced. Or if you like brushing your teeth in this very particular way and we work through this chain and we do brush our teeth in this other way, we're not necessarily going to brush our teeth again on this opportunity. Maybe on the next opportunity it will be an FCR, but on this opportunity it won't. So I really think about this when you get to that point is an extension of SBT, because it does not get restored. It is not reinforced sometimes at the end of the novel activity. That usually by the point we get to that point, it's not necessarily the novelty anymore, because you've probably presented so much novelty at this point that it's not a novel thing. It's no longer, so how do I say this? It's no longer the presentation of the new soap. It's the presentation of a novel part of a chain. That is what you're actually targeting. So if you generalize that from the start, and you're not always just changing the soap, but you're changing the soap, maybe the towel the next time, maybe the toothbrush is in a new place, and on the next one, the mirror is open when you don't expect it to be open, and every single time you're kind of changing it up, you're actually generalizing from the beginning with your stimuli, and then over time, you're actually teaching them to be okay with novelty, not just a novel part of the chain, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I love that point about not always being able to reinforce it, because even if we could do that, right? So we can go through the toothbrushing process, and then I could actually reinforce your FCR by getting out your favorite toothbrush, but it's not healthy to brush your teeth twice every time, right? So there's a lot of things where it either is not safe or healthy or practical for people to do. Like, you can't actually go to the bathroom twice if you've already gone. That you can't do that chain again from start to finish, because you won't be able to go. You already went. So yeah, definitely looking at that practicality.
And I think about the, like, I had a client who would only drink out of one very specific cup, and they didn't make that cup anymore, and the cup was going to break. So we had to get to the point where not having access to that cup anymore was okay, because they would never have access to it again. And so we do have to plan for those things sometimes, right? Oftentimes I have the organic Annie's mac and cheese, I think 2 years ago, changed their branding, and it was one of my friends, her child is the only food her child would eat. And when they changed the brand on the box, the child would no longer eat that mac and cheese, and was ultimately considered for a feeding tube because they wouldn't eat. So that is a health and safety issue at that point. If that's that novelty, it's the same exact food, nothing has changed, but because the packaging has changed, I can no longer access this food.
Yeah. And I'm going to move on. I could talk about this topic all day, but that would be one of the things where we might get that milestone skill for free, where when we're working on tolerating some of these changes, the learner now has the opportunity to experience novel stimuli that they would never have engaged with before, because it wasn't part of the way they do things. And in doing so, we're in some ways running a de facto preference assessment, where now they're actually experiencing new things that they hadn't before and figuring out ones that they like. And so a milestone can be that now they actually like 3 different brands of mac and cheese that they never would have eaten before, but because they tried them or were open to trying them as a part of this process, they might still, the Annie's might be they're still their favorite, but now they also have 3 others that they like and they're okay with eating. So
Yep.
Okay.
Free,
so,
for free.
Yeah.
And then the fourth, and then one day there's accidentally something else, and they're okay with it too, because we've taught them to be okay. It's okay to be a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah. I'm going to try to move through a little faster, just because I can hear my daughter getting a little bit out of HRE in the other room. So don't get me started about Ryan and unboxing videos and YouTube surprise eggs, because otherwise my brain will explode, and I wish that I could take all of their money and give it to people who really need it. But so this particular EO, I don't know if my colleague Alicia is still here, but one of the, no, of course not, she's in a different time zone, but one of the learners that we've encountered is that, oh, it's new. Ooh, it's something I haven't seen before. And that aspect of novelty is huge. And we had some pretty challenging behavior the other day because of something that was not actually a new toy, but it's one that he hasn't played with in a while, and it was unavailable. And therefore, the value grew much higher it was really, really challenging to move away from that toy without being able to explore it and touch it. Luckily, this is one that's actually, as you can see in the picture, fairly easy to practice and work on as a cab, where you practice the element of surprise, regardless of whether the items are actually new or not, and work on things being up out of reach, unavailable, ooh, what's that? Putting toys away so that they don't have access to them for a while, and then suddenly making them available again, and then saying no. So there's different ways that we can program for that in a contrived manner so that it's much easier when it comes up naturally. All right, this next one is when Hillary and I were talking about a little bit the other night, so this is one where there's been some really nice research in EAB, and there was, Matt Sikoria had a really nice episode, and I apologize, I can't remember all of the researchers' names, but it was looking at both delay discounting and also different types of choice being reinforcing. And it was interesting because it's translational research, so they were looking at what do they see in the lab, and then how does this translate to real life. And for some of the items, I was like, have you ever played with a kid before? Like some of the things that were like aha moments seemed like duh moments to me, because kids like choice and people like accessing choice, and people like to choose how they engage with something. Oh, right, they were talking about accumulated versus distributed tokens, and how that affected people's behavior, and whether we might see a difference if someone gets to play video games in 30-second intervals versus saving up all their time and then getting 10 minutes of playing a video game. Like, or do you get one cracker at a time versus all the crackers and then you get to eat them all at once? It was interesting though that like a lot of these aspects of choice are really matter to a lot of kids, but people don't always pay attention to them. And so one of the something that I have encountered quite a bit that really was a head scratcher for me until I figured it out was this type of thing where I offer you 2 items, and one of them is the one you always choose and it's your most favorite, and then you insist on a third choice and engage in problem behavior when you can't get that third choice. But if I could hit the rewind button and I offered that third choice, you would ask for the one that I had offered to begin with. And it's not adult compliance with MANs, it's that they don't want to be limited to what the choices are. I want you to give me the marker box and I want to look at all the colors and pick one. I don't want you to say, do you want blue or purple, which is a really arbitrary choice of what was there. It's just those happen to be the ones I pulled out and I know you like blue. So I will see this happen, especially in classrooms or groups of kids where these poor children end up with no markers because the behavior that they engage in when they're given a choice means that they lose the choice. The teacher moves on. The teacher says, I'll come back to you, as essentially a punishment for the child not making the choice. They go to the friend, and then the friend picks the color that kid really wanted. So now when the teacher does come back to them, they're still not calm because now they realize they've lost the opportunity to actually pick with even get one marker at all, and now they're kicked out of the group and they don't get to do the activity because they're screaming and kicking the furniture. So when this happens, and I certainly speak from experience of doing this incorrectly and not realizing that that's what was going on and trying lots of different things that weren't effective. So when you do, really looking at that being what you're helping the learner to use their FCR to access. I would like a choice. I'd like to look in the box. Can you hand me the plate instead of handing me one of the crackers on the plate and they're all identical, but they want to be the one to take the one off the plate themselves. And I think I did an example for that. Yeah. So here the learner is supposed to make a choice between offered options and engage with that item. They're usually not. So CAB 2 might be attending to the adult, listening to the choice, looking at the options or maybe saying to themselves what they are. CAB 3 might be making a selection, maybe taking the item, maybe preparing to use it, but not actually using it yet. That way you can still reinforce with giving them access to a wider choice after they do that. So this one, I was really trying to think of ways to push the CABs forward without making the learner necessarily use the item that they didn't want to choose to begin with. So for CAB 4, I was thinking of an example of the teacher says, okay, we're going out to recess. If you want to go on the monkey bars, stay in your chair. And if you want to go down the slide, go line up at the door. And the learner doesn't want to make a choice between those two things, even if they like both of them. They would like the teacher to ask them, what would you like to do on the playground? So here we might look at asking them to do other things that are related to getting ready to go to recess. And then when they can do all of those things safely, and you actually end up by CAB 5, or even 4, you're out on the play yard, then you say to the learner, oh, hey, what did you want to play with? Which is what they wanted you to do to begin with. And then they might happily say the monkey bars, and off they go to play. CAB 6 then is more like what Hillary was saying before, where we might actually ask them to make a choice from those two and actually play with one of those items or use that item, or we're offering a less preferred as another option. Or they get to do something but without a preferred peer, or you ask them to go inside and wait for another teacher in order to go outside, so they actually have to tolerate missing some of recess, but then by doing so they're actually able to make their choice. This is a good example of one where I couldn't write out any of this ahead of time. You would have to be in the example to figure out what it is that you would be asking them to do. But again, all still related to the actual activity. Okay. And oh, we are so close to the end. Okay. All right, so I had down that both of us would talk about these ones. Hillary, did you want to talk for a minute about the unreasonable or unavailable? Because I know this one was important to you.
It's like my favorite thing to talk about. That thread between Emily and I like changed the life of one of my learners in a way I don't even know how to describe, because the unavailable components of his life were what was affecting him the most deeply and impacting our ability to even access HRE, to have a safe environment to teach from. So one of the things I like to talk about with people when I'm talking about an unavailable or an unreasonable CAB branch is that the unavailable or the unreasonable is not changed with an FCR or with SBT as we consider it now, right? So when I tell a learner something is unavailable, my way is not available to make that available again. I just said available a lot. But if I tell them they can't have it and they want to ask with my way, it's that FCR is not, with my learner that I was talking about a second ago, we'd say unavailable doesn't change with my way, right? So it's not going to change with my way. What we're actually doing, it's like an extension again of our SBT for our, you have to decide for your own learner, but I'm going to use this learner as an example because it's what I have the most practice with. But we have a criteria of time that has to pass before we will consider making something available again. And one of the things I got from Emily that was so powerful is that the learner never knows if something's going to become available again or if it's not going to become available again. And so I've kind of divided this into 4 different categories of unavailable or unreasonable. One is arbitrary versus not arbitrary. So sometimes it might make sense to target not arbitrary stimuli to make unavailable, because the arbitrary, it might make sense to target arbitrary stimuli first because the not arbitrary stimuli might be too hot. And so you might need to start there just to get them in contact with this idea that someone says this thing, something leaves or becomes unavailable and I can't access it again and I never know when it's coming back, before you can even necessarily target the things that are going to cause some pretty big emotions to arise and go to the emotional borderlands. The other quality that I think is really important about this is does it return or does it never come back? And I have found in utilizing this, it is so important to sometimes make it come back. So sometimes we choose something that is not arbitrary, like the iPad, that becomes unavailable unexpectedly, maybe because its battery is dead and we can't find a charger, or mom is upset about something and just decided, or I don't have the Wi-Fi went out, for example. So now the iPad is unavailable, and the learner doesn't know this, but in 30 minutes, we're going to make it available again. So they never know when I say something's unavailable, if it's going to be available again now or never or tomorrow. And that quality is what makes it really powerful. And I think, Emily, you described this in such a way that was so powerful to me, is that you teach them to be safely uncomfortable, and then that goes away because you reinforce them being okay, being uncomfortable. And I think that was really powerful to learn about. And one of the things that I applied with this learner was we just put like a limited hold. So we said, after we say that word, here's the amount of behavior that we'll allow. And then once, like, if we don't reach this level, then we can make it available again. If we don't get to that high level of behavior, then a 15-minute hold gets put. And anytime after that 15 minutes, you can make it available again. It does not matter when, but at any point in time after that. For some learners, that might be shorter or longer, because it always depends. But the unavailable CAB branch has been a game changer, and I just love it so much. I was going to ask you if you want to do a full hangout on it sometime, because I just want to talk about it all the time.
Sure.
But just the idea of a hard no is so hard for kids. And I think that this really tackles that in a way that's meaningful and teaches skills.
Well, and so the kind of all of these sort of fit under that. Essentially, the last one was one that I encountered on Monday with a learner who asked really nicely for something that would be an EFL R7 request. Something that is preferred, that is usually made frequently and nearly immediately available. And if the learner is asking nicely, they usually get it. And for some reason, the adult said no, and the learner didn't know why. And then we had some R2s and then some R1s. So being able to not feel like you understand why it's suddenly a no when it shouldn't be a no, and who knows when it's gonna, well, if it's a no now, does that mean I don't ever get to play with this again, since it doesn't make sense to me why I wouldn't get it now? Being able to sit with that discomfort, and this happens all the time in real life, where we just can't explain to the learner. Either we don't have the time, we don't have the luxury, there's too many kids, they don't have the language to understand the explanation for why something that should be a reasonable demand is not a reasonable one right now, because of course it's contextual. So being able to target that and be okay with that, and then for us to really purposely practice how do we turn that around, and then offer it to them again when they've been okay with tolerating that lower level of discomfort. All right, so here's just an example of this. This specific example, I've seen this before, where a learner asks for something that they know you're going to say no to already before they ask. Right? There might be different reasons for that. Maybe they feel so strongly about having the thing that even though they know the answer is no, they can't help themselves from asking, just in case there's a chance to say yes. For some kids, they like the fight and the struggle when you say no and then try to stick to it. Other kids know that there's a history of, when I ask for something that's a hard no, I know what's going to happen after I do that, and then it's going to turn to a yes. So in this example, let's say this is where, like, for each CAB, I had to think of different situations that you had been. But whatever the learner is, they ask for it, you say no, they say okay, and then CAB 3 is like whatever you're currently doing, just do a little bit more of that. So I just put some examples for that for CAB 4. So let's say the mealtime snack. the child asks for peanut butter and they know there's no peanut butter because you told them earlier, oh, hey, we ran out of peanut butter, but they love peanut butter on their banana. They really like those two together. So they ask for it anyway, and you already have the banana out. So you ask them to help you peel the banana, put it on the plate, and help you drizzle some honey on top. And then at the end of that, you'd look in the cupboard and it turns out that your spouse had bought a new jar of peanut butter you didn't realize, or, oh, I forgot I tucked this one away for an emergency, whatever the reason you come up with, now suddenly there's a jar. Or if you're taking a bath, perhaps they want more, you've put a certain amount of bubble bath in the water and they want a lot more, and you know they'll just empty the entire thing and then you'll be out of soap and it's not healthy to have that much. So you ask them to pass you the shampoo. Maybe as you're washing their hair, you point out some funny shapes that you see in the bubbles and you help them find their favorite toy. And then you know what, let's add another squirt of soap. Same thing with the grocery shopping. So these really are sort of a mixture of helping an adult as well as doing something that's part of the current activity. And then we're magically going to be able to say yes. So obviously 5 is just an extension of 4, and then 6 would be things like moving further away, either physically or in the routine, so that it makes it look like you're not going to do that thing for sure, and then you do. Continuing further into the task. Maybe if you're in the grocery store and they ask for ice cream and you say no, now you're going to the produce aisle, which is really far from the freezer, and you're almost at the end of your shopping list, and then right when you get to the counter, you're like, you know what, we haven't had ice cream in a few weeks. Let's go pick one out. And you go back to the freezer, or just as an example. So again, these things, if I were to fill this out for to help staff implement it, I would be giving some examples just like I do here, and then I would have a list of just like classes of things you might ask them to do or ask them to help you with, looking as much as possible for those things to really be mastered and also often preferred by the learner. So I have some kids that love helping and they like when the adult is mixed up or confused and that kind of thing. I'm going to make sure to throw some of those in as trials, because it's not about what you're doing. It's about that you're doing sort of natural, normal things while you're tolerating a delay. So they don't all need to be like demands. There should be also just fun, playful things that the learner is good at doing. Like, I forgot how to spell cat, and I'm telling that to a 5th grader who thinks it's hysterical that a grown-up can't spell cat, and he's going to help me. And that's like 2 or 3 trials right there.
I have a don't say that. That's a little bit more concrete and a little bit that's very easy for us to contrive. I have a client who is very particular about how you say certain things about movies. So you cannot say the title wrong or get a character name wrong or quote it wrong, or it'll cause a pretty significant problem behavior. And so that's really, really easy for us to contrive. And we initially had to start out with like, hey buddy, I'm gonna call it this, right? So it's as the signal, and then we were able to contextualize it more and just say it and just say, okay, I'm gonna call it sponge square or whatever. And then we immediately get our FCR, and sometimes we delay, and then in our delay, we're typically engaging still in preferred activities. So the client does not have to leave the SR condition at all. We've just altered some aspect of the SR condition. But we still continue saying sponge square periodically as we're talking about it to ensure that we're still tolerating that people are not calling it the thing I want it to be called. And then after we've met our target, we reinforce, okay, I'm going to call it SpongeBob. I can't believe I forgot that his name is SpongeBob. And then we move on from there.
Oh yeah, that's a perfect example for, so I kind of have to go, so I just want to check and see. Let's see. So I feel like we missed a slide in here. Oh, this one. So the requests, the attention, I think I'll just put in a couple more examples of that so that we can end on this one, which is you kind of what you were talking about just now. So if you want to give a few examples of what this might look like.
Sure, I love spontaneous requests. So I think you know, initially in SBT, if we're doing a really tight treatment, we want to make sure the learner does not have to request for anything, their needs are being met, and everything is, you know, really sealed up so that there's no need for them to engage in any problem behavior to get their needs met. But eventually what starts to happen is you kind of get this flexibility and this ability to delay and tolerate some stress. And when that happens, I love introducing a spontaneous request CAB, because all of a sudden I know my learner can tolerate me saying no or not understanding or having to work to get something. And so they might say, hey, I want to do this thing, and I can just deny it from that spot and start teaching them that from the moment they make that spontaneous request, it is available for me to deny and do toleration training around. So something like the videos, for example, right? Like maybe somebody makes a mistake about saying the name wrong, the learner could immediately be like, well, you have to call it this, and we're just going to say no from there. So our CFCR would be, call it SpongeBob, and we're going to say, oh, sure, I'll call it SpongeBob. But our TR would be, call it SpongeBob, and we kind of take a tone and we try to make it really clear initially with a clear signal of no, so it sounds like our my way no. No, not right now, to get that okay, and then reinforce that TR, and then slowly build those denials in. This is handy when, you know, mom, you're doing treatment in the house and mom is busy, but the child wants something for their SR condition that only mom can deliver. Or you have to change the movies out, or you have to prepare the snack, or there's so many situations in real life where a request is made that will not be fulfilled with an omnibus demand and has to be specified and is very specific to a context that might need to be treated under the model of variable reinforcement in a specific generalization CAB, so that when it comes time to do it in real life, that skill has transferred to this new activity, this new expectation. And what I found is over time, my clients learn that any request that they make is available for denial and is available for a tolerated denial, a long denial possibly. And that it just builds so much flexibility into this process. And I really think it builds some really valuable and beautiful skills into the generalization context for when it's real life. And I'm wanting the peanut butter, for example, that Emily talked about. And we haven't maybe practiced that context, but we've practiced a lot of tolerance and we practice spontaneous requests. So all of a sudden you're in a generalization context and mom says, we don't have peanut butter. And the kid's like, okay, I'm cool. And everyone's really surprised. And it's a beautiful thing that happens.
Yeah, thank you. And I definitely see with some of these that one of those sort of things that we might get for free then is the learner beginning to not only just accept an indefinite delay and be totally fine with it, even if you plan to come back and do it, but that, and I will program for this separately and concurrently as well, but often I will see learners begin to just spontaneously make other choices instead and be totally fine with it. So they want red and, oh, sorry, buddy, the red's all dried up. And they're like, all right, cool, I'll take blue. And so the last thing that I'll say about that is when that skill is emerging, it's very easy for the adult to just go with that, but I like to ensure, at least at the beginning, they always get a chance to go back and do the thing that I said no to, that I would have reinforced if they were just doing the CAB, whatever the CAB steps were, and hadn't chosen the other color. So that choosing something else is not a CMOR for, well, then I've lost the opportunity to have the other thing. So that I say, oh, sorry, the red is all dried up. The child chooses blue, they begin coloring with blue, or maybe they're even just getting blue ready. And I'm like, oh, I found another red. Did you want to stick with blue, or did you actually want to still use red? So that they see that they're not just giving up their way every time that they're flexible and go with another choice, but that we do try to meet their needs even more so sometimes when they've been flexible about those other things.
I couldn't agree with that more. And this will be the last thing I say, and then we'll end. I notice this frequently when people are like, well, you know, in the group, there's oftentimes a question about this, right? well, he'll transition all the way to the table. And he does all this work and he doesn't emit the FCR. And it's like, that's what we want, right? That's a beautiful thing. We still want to reinforce parts of that chain intermittently and variably because we want to maintain those behaviors as such a beautiful and positive thing, even if they're not going to emit the FCR until maybe a CAP 3. Because you don't want to put that beautiful transition on extinction and then have to go back and treat it with SBT and back up. So we can end. This has been a very long hangout. I'm so appreciative of you, Emily, and everyone who joined us. And it's going to take my computer hours to download the recording. If anyone has any questions, feel free to post them in the group. Yeah, I know. Yes, thank you for sticking with us.
We can make a post when we put the video and the slides and examples up, and then if people want to have any questions in that thread, that would be great. But if you are jumping at the bit and you want to toss your question out in the group before then, that's fine too. So
sounds good. Thank you, everyone.
Everyone have a wonderful night. Bye.